Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today and welcome to our first in a series of webinar events that we'll be hosting this year. Today's topic will be innovative solutions to the housing crisis, and we'll be joined by three organizations that we know very well and we've been close to for years. We're grateful to have them with us today. Today we'll be joined by Joanne Price from Life Moves, Kate Comfort Har from HIF Housing, and Jordan Moss from Catalyst Housing. And first up, we'll ask Joanne Price to talk about Life Moves' very exciting project in Mountain View.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Joanne Price. I'm VP of Real Estate and Operations for Life Moves. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Life Moves, we have one of the longest and largest provider of homeless shelter and services here in Silicon Valley. On a given night, we house up to 1,200 people, and a third of those are often minor children. We have over 35 years of experience in this space, and as such, we have really great success rates. 86% of our families who enter our programs will exit to stable housing, and about 67 of our single clients. So what does homelessness in the USA look like today? You see that 50% of the unsheltered homeless reside in California, and about 70% of California's homeless are unsheltered. That's a whopping 108,000 people. And it's hard to ignore. We've probably all seen the encampments popping up in our communities, on the side of roads, under bridges, next to freeways. And we can continue to allow the streets to be our waiting room as we get to permanent housing. Permanent housing often takes 4 to 5 years to build, and it comes with a hefty price tag, up to over $500,000 per door. So what we're recommending is we have like an interim supportive housing solution like that, what you see in the center of the screen, a modular, rapid deployed structures that can be put up in a matter of months and be a fraction of the cost of permanent housing. The units that you see here on the screen are $17,000 per door, and they can be delivered in less than 4 months. So what is the cost of doing nothing? And a report by Destination Homes back in 2015 indicated that it could be as high as $62,000 per year per chronically homeless person. And that includes, that's the top percent of homeless who have frequent ambulance, police, and fire calls. And there's also the public health cost and trash removal. There's definitely a cost associated with this. And the longer a person stays on the street, the quicker their physical and often mental health deteriorates, and then the sooner they become chronically homeless. So if there's a cost of doing nothing, which is considerably high, what's the cost of doing something? And when you're living on the streets, it's often your focus is meeting your immediate needs. You're thinking like you want to make sure that you've got a roof over your head, you're going to be dry for the night, that you wake up in the morning with all your possessions, and where you're going to get the next meal from. It's not focused on securing housing, securing employment. Our Mountain View project creates a community that addresses all of those needs, so clients can focus on returning to stable housing. And at the same time, you can see that it creates and brings about order from the chaos that we're seeing on the streets. And it also offers a robust support of services for significantly less than the cost of putting people up in the hotels. It's less than $60 per night. Not only that, is a fraction of the cost to build for a hotel door, often 50% cheaper. 150,000 a door versus 300. And these communities can be put up now in a matter of months, making our communities safer and more secure now. And you can see that where we were back at the end of November, this was the site on the left-hand side. And a couple of weeks ago, we had placed all the structures, all the sleeping units, and all the support buildings on site. So this is our solution. This is what we're recommending to address the immediate problem that we're seeing in our communities, having a place to move people out of encampments into a safe and secure community. They're rapidly deployed, and Mountain View was built under less than 6 months. They're very cost effective, to like $150,000 per door. And they improve the community safety and security. There's an immediate and visible impact into the communities that we move into. With Mountain View, we have 100 doors. There's 88 singles and 12 families, equating to 124 beds. That's 10 times Mountain View's current year-round capacity, homeless shelter capacity. And when you factor in how we deliver our services, people typically stay with us between 90 to 120 days, which means that in the first year alone, we will be likely serving 300 people or more. And when you consider Mountain View's homeless count back in 2019 was 606 people, you can see that we'll have a 50% impact within 12 months of moving people into stable housing. Not only that, it's not just this, like, providing shelter, providing a roof, moving people off the streets. It's crucial that we deliver support or wraparound services to help people get from homelessness to stable housing. So on site, we'll also have intense case management services. There'll be mental and behavioral health services. There's also a full-time nurse on site and a medical office, and there's family and children resources. And overall, this provides privacy and dignity to our neighbors in the community. So let's take a peek inside one of the units. You'll see that they're very light and bright, and offer a sense of well-being. They're also safe and secure. And congregate shelters can be a barrier to entry. So clients typically want their own front door. They want to feel safe and secure. They want to put their possessions in and know that they'll still be there when they wake up in the morning. And sometimes we all need that place to kind of sit and take a breather from life, especially when we're stressed and we want to just collect our thoughts. This gives everybody a place to rest their head at the end of the day. All units are ADA compliant, and they also have their own HVAC and heating and cooling. So when we look at this, like the communities that we need to build to help people transition from homelessness to stable housing, yes, we need to provide units for people to sleep in, but we also need to provide that love and support that goes hand in hand with helping people transition. And that's all the support services I've talked about, and food, and what we like to think is the heart of the community. And we can deliver all this and all these services and employment specialists and housing specialists, intensive case management, nurses, medical support, family support, trauma support, all this for less than $60 per night. So is it scalable? We like to think so. And when you think of what we've created in Mountain View in a matter of months, just think what we could create if 10 of these we're just like speckled throughout Silicon Valley, that we could be serving at least 3,000 homeless people each and every year. And so in a matter of years, 3 to 5 years, the same time that it takes to entitle certain properties, we could have served 15,000 homeless people and have them on the path to stable housing. We're preparing to create our next 1 to 2 projects right here in Silicon Valley, because HomeKey 2.0 will be accepting applications in July, and we are in the process of gathering interest from local municipalities and impact investment from the private sector. So anyone on the call today with leads to property or land, please do get in touch, because we think this is a really great solution. It's very cost effective. It offers the support to our homeless, and it gets people on the path to stable housing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was wonderful. And what we're going to do, everyone, I should have said in the housekeeping section, is we're going to have each of our panelists do their presentation, and then we'll have you send us questions in the Q&A and or chat, and we will get to your questions when we get to the Q&A session after the presentation. So let me invite Kate to discuss HIP Housing's creative affordable housing solutions in San Mateo. Thank you, Kate.
Hi there. Yes, I am Kate, and I'm Executive Director of HIP Housing. I've been there just about 10 years. We really specialize in creative, affordable housing solutions throughout San Mateo County. We've been in business since 1972, and our real area of expertise is around how to use existing housing stock a little bit more efficiently. Next. When you look at the continuum of affordable housing, at one end, you're going to have shelters, 30, 60, 90, maybe 120 days stay. At the other end, you're going to have owned affordable housing, like a Habitat for Humanity or a first-time home buying loan through a city. Those are far and few in between. The majority of affordable housing falls into the multifamily range. And in that arena, you have really large developers like Eden and MidPenn and Alta. They do beautiful projects, 50 to 150 units. You'd be proud to live in them. You'd be proud to have your family live in them. But they can take anywhere from 3 to 10 years to bring online. They're quite costly. So we need other solutions as well. And that's where HIP Housing comes in. We can go back up to the previous slide. Yeah, so that's where HIP Housing comes in. What we do is a little bit different. We started as a social service agency. We added a development and property management component a little bit later. And what we really try to do, as I said earlier, is this existing housing stock. How can we use that more efficiently? And in that realm, we really work on something called preservation, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Next slide. We house about 1,400 people each year. About 700 of those, or half, are in our social service programs. And that's kind of what we're known for. Our flagship program is called Home Sharing, where we match people who have space in their home with people who need an affordable place to live. This works really well for singles, for a couple, or maybe a single parent with one child, but not so great for families. We do provide a tremendous amount of case management, so it's not like renting a room through Craigslist. We really do have a lot of services and staff in place to support our matches, but again, not great for families. So for families, we have a program called our self-sufficiency program, and that's for families that are either homeless or at risk of homelessness and are referred from other agencies like Life Moves, for example, or HIF, but they really want to break their cycle of poverty. And to do that, they need to be in school, but they're working 2 or 3 jobs. They can't go to school, have housing, and raise their families. So what we do is we provide them with housing or housing stipend, and in exchange, they get in school, they stay in school, they get case managed very heavily. We provide them with life skills workshops, we do budgeting, we make sure that we address the trauma that are barriers to them succeeding, and we move them forward. The other half of the folks that we serve are in our property development and management programs. So in that area, we really focus on preservation housing, and I'll talk more about that. Preservation is really dependent on cross-sector collaborations. Another thing that we're doing in addition to that is on our property management side, we provide a program that's a compliance program. And that program is for market rate owners who have a requirement to provide a certain proportion of their units as affordable. We'll do the compliance for them. We'll both maintain a wait list, make sure people have the right incomes, do annual certifications, do the reporting back to the cities to help those owners stay in compliance. Next slide. So what is preservation? Preservation is the acquisition of existing housing stock, you deed restrict it, and you manage it as affordable in perpetuity. Next slide. So there's some ingredients to having to finance these preservation projects. It used to be that everything was done through redevelopment agencies, but those went away in 2012. So that meant we had to find new ways to do acquisition of existing housing stock. There we go. So there's a couple of different things that we need to do with that. One is that we have to really work with municipalities, and municipalities are going to typically have either impact fees, and some have access to home or CDBG. The next thing are loan products. We need special loan products that allow us to really make these projects pencil. Those products have to have longer amortization schedules, and they have to have really competitive interest rates. In addition, we need to work with private lenders, and those private lenders are typically going to be small, locally owned banks that we can build really great relationships with, and then we can also help them meet their CRA requirements, which is the Community Reinvestment Act, because investing in affordable housing is a great way for banks to meet their CRA requirement. We also have to really utilize cross-sector collaborations, and this is kind of a very modern, unique approach, is using these private public nonprofit partnerships to solve a housing crisis that's too big for any one of us to fix on our own. And then the final ingredient to financing is an affordable deed restriction. We have to have that, and that has to be provided by a municipality or a governmental agency, and that's how we get our property tax exemption, which allows our projects to actually pencil. Next. So what do we look for in preservation? There are 5 critical considerations that we're looking for. First is that the property has to be close to services and transportation, but even more importantly, it has to be in a city that has money and interest in affordable housing. The next thing is we need a really agreeable seller, a seller that wants to work with a nonprofit. And the reason is because we're going to have slower escrow times. Because we have to cobble together some financing, and we're working with cities to do that, it takes time. You have regulatory agreements, you have legal, you have all this back and forth. So we need a seller that's willing to work with us. And in exchange, their tenants get to stay in place once they sell the building, and that's important to some owners. Size. Whoop, back up. So size is also critically important. Typically, these projects are going to be smaller. They're going to be 6 to 16 units. And the reason is cities don't have a ton of money, and they're going to be bringing in maybe as much as 2/3 of the funding in order to acquire these properties. So that funding has to have a significant impact. You get up over 20 units, and properties get far too expensive to be able to have cities make a really good impact on them. The properties also have to be well maintained and in very good condition. And the reason is they're small, right? They're not going to throw off a lot of cash. And we want to make sure that we're able to take care of those buildings and that they remain really good neighbors in the neighborhood. So that means replacement reserves. And so we're not going to be eligible for large loans or city and county or state sort of refinance programs because the unit sizes are too small. The properties themselves are too small. So we want to start with a really good property so that we know that we can maintain it. And then finally, we're looking for properties where tenants most likely already income qualify or where there are vacant units. And the reason for that is we're required to pay property tax for anybody who resides in one of our buildings that earns over what we call AMI, 80% of AMI. So AMI is the average median income. It's determined by HUD. And so anybody who makes over what that 80% of AMI is going to trigger property tax for us to pay. And we don't want to have to do that. Like I said, these buildings don't throw off a ton of money. So we want to make sure that they're going to pencil in order to pencil. They need to have tenants who income qualify. Next slide. What's unique about preservation, they come up super quickly and unexpectedly. They're regular market buildings, right? They go up for sale. You're competing with the market forces in order to be able to acquire them. So somebody might come in with a 7-day offer, cash, and we have to compete with that. So we have to be able to really move in an agile way. They're bound by these really tight escrow limitations, right? You're going to get 30, 60 days. You know, we really try to work for, 90, 120, 150 days because we do have to cobble together some financing stack. And as a result of these tight escrow periods, we really have to simplify our financing stack. When you talk about those big properties that like Mid-Penn or Eden does, they can have 10, 15 lenders on those, and coordinating that takes time because a lot of them are state and federal agencies. We don't have that kind of time. We've got escrow limitations. So we have to have a very simplified financing stack, which is why we really look to cities and maybe a single loan entity. And then also they're going to involve some cross-sector collaborations. So there are several Steve asked me if I would please provide some examples of these cross sector collaborations. So next slide, please. So I'm going to give you 3 examples. The first one is Rollison. It was a 10-unit acquisition that we did. So if you can show there we go. So Premium Capital, a guy named Mike Hallow, who runs that company, was doing a large commercial development. He was going to have to pay about $2.5 million in impact fees. Now, one of the challenges with impact fees, when you pay those to a city, is once the city gets the money, they're bound by laws and regulations about how they can distribute that money. And it can take a really long time. They have to go through a NOFA. They have to have staff to be able to take competitive bids. They really have to wait for a project to come online. And those projects can be long and far and few in between. So Mike didn't want to have to put that money into the city's hands. Nobody wants to pay an impact fee anyway, right? But if you're going to have to pay it, you want to see it at least used for something that's meaningful. So we were able to work with him. He actually was referred to us by the city, and he said, hey, let's build something really different. So what we did was called an alternate affordable housing plan. So as his commercial development went through entitlements, we went along right beside him to say, instead of paying the $2.5 million to the city, we'll take that same amount of money and put it directly into an escrow account that will allow HIP Housing to purchase 10 units that are in Redwood City, deed restrict them as affordable, and you'll get affordable housing right away rather than waiting for it to be administered through the city. The Planning Commission loved it. All that stuff was great. City Council loved it. Well, ran into a hassle with this particular project because every project is different. We ran into a delay in the entitlement process, right? It ended up taking almost 2 years for entitlements. And no seller of a 10-unit building is going to wait 2 years for you to actually acquire their building. So we needed a third-party partner that could come in, actually acquire the building, hold it for us so that we're able to purchase it at a later date. But we got into contract, so that all worked out. That was Sandhill Properties did that for us. So they held the property. We master leased it. We held on to it. We continued through that entitlement process with Mike. And at the end, everything came through. The $2.5 million got deposited in escrow. We were able to close on that deal. And if you hit the next button, you'll see that we got a 10-unit property, studio property, really great for single folks really looking for an affordable place to live. We have those deed restricted at 60% AMI, but we often rent them at 30. Next slide. This is an entirely different project where the other one was a diverted impact fee. This one actually used the impact fee that went to the city. So the city of Menlo Park offered what we call a NOFA, which is a notice for funding, that they had $10 million that they wanted to spend on affordable housing. We discovered this property. It's 14 units in Menlo Park. It's got 2 bedrooms. So that was really exciting for us. Beautifully maintained. City loved the project. We went through the whole NOFA process. We were able to get a little bit of an extension on the escrow. I think we got 120 days on this one. City moved mountains in order to be able to fund us through this NOFA process. They fast-tracked us. They got us through in 120 days, which is unheard of. We were really, really pleased with the cooperation we got from the city. We used a local private bank, which is what we like to do because we can build relationships there. We used Beacon Business Bank to finance the other portion of the building, but we still had a $125,000 gap. And you're talking about a $7.5 million project, and the whole thing can blow up over $125,000. So you don't want that. So we reached out to Facebook. Facebook at the time did not have a product or a loan product or anything that they could use to help us with this project. But we stayed on them, and they actually adapted their policies and practices to be able to provide, not as a loan, but as a grant, $125,000 to help us acquire this property. This property closed escrow on April 1st. I'm actually doing the first tenant meeting there tonight. It's beautiful. I had 6 vacant units, so that was a real plus for us, and a different way that we were able to partner not just with the city, but also with a private entity. And the last project I'd like to highlight is a third one that's very different than the first 2 that I talked about. So next slide. So this is Chilco. Chilco was actually donated to HIP Housing, and that was facilitated by our friends at Windy Hill. Jamie and Todd made this happen for us. And what we wanted to use this home for was our self-sufficiency program. Remember, it's that program for families, homeless families that are in school. This is now home to 2 families that are in school working towards their own self-sufficiency and being able to support themselves. They each have dependent children. It's 4-bedroom, 2-bath. They each get two bedrooms and a single bath, and then they share the common areas. This was a spectacular boon for us. I mean, to get a piece of property donated to a nonprofit is spectacular. One of the challenges we ran into, though, is because there was no funding from a city entity, we had no deed restriction. And without deed restriction, we had to pay property tax. So we had to get really creative. So we went out to the county and said, look, is it possible to get a project-based contract on this building to both help with the operating costs and also help with supporting the tenants? And they said, yeah, this is great, let's do this. So we were able to get housing authority, was through the county, the housing authority contract that said that not only is this building owned by a nonprofit, it's being used for charitable purposes. We trust this nonprofit. We're in contract with them for a PBA contract, and we use that with the assessor's office to allow us to have the equivalent of a deed restriction that would provide us with property tax exemption. So again, we had the Windy Hill partners as our private partner, the city, the county working with us to try to figure out how to get the property tax exemption, and a nonprofit that now actually owns that building and is able to use it for really charitable purposes. So 3 very different models of collaboration between private, public, and nonprofit entities, but each very, very successful. Steve also asked me to talk a little bit about the money that's come in from outside sources from the private sector. So next slide. So we have been looking, there's a ton of money that's come from the private sector, and this is brand new. You don't see this. Typically, private, company philanthropy is about 5% of all philanthropy in the nonprofit sector. But in the Bay Area, because housing is such an issue, and because some of these big tech companies recognize their role in creating the housing crisis that we have, they've put a ton of money into it. The challenge is, they're not housers. So they don't really know how to distribute it or what to do. So they followed a lot of government sort of guidelines on how to distribute this money. And it's very hard for the nonprofit sector to access. The loan products aren't very good. Even finding where the money is and how to access it, how to apply for it, it takes a long time. Sometimes they're on grant cycles. So it's very similar now to trying to apply for governmental money, but that's a learning curve. What this represents to me is interest and an opportunity to educate. I think there's a lot of opportunity now with private sector partnerships. I mean, the fact that there's this much money, millions and millions and millions of dollars being invested into housing. Now we just got to figure out how to use it and how to create partnerships that are really meaningful. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Well, I guess it's my time. Thanks for having me. Sorry for the t-shirt. I'm on spring break with the family. And of course, it was totally quiet here until just a moment ago when the baby woke up and someone started doing some landscaping work out front, but we'll try to stay focused here. So I'm the founder of Catalyst Housing Group, Jordan Moss. Nice to see everybody today. We like to say that Catalyst lives at the intersection of housing, innovation, and impact. We'll talk about those things today. We can flip to the next slide here. So our beginnings, I've personally spent 20 years now in the housing space, kind of done everything in and around the institutional multifamily market. Started Catalyst at the beginning of 2015 to focus exclusively on affordable housing. And out of the gates, we were focused on more traditional capital A affordable. We were developing mostly tax credit, bond finance deals in and around Seattle for various reasons. And I would say, our takeaways from that, aside from that, I realized pretty early on that I didn't have the temperament for that business. As it says here, we need to be able to operate outside of the traditional confines of the affordable housing subsidies we've heard about today. The LIHTC space has been pretty impactful over the last, 20, 30 years. But the missing middle, the folks who make too much to qualify for traditional capital A affordable housing, yet not enough to live within their communities, really have nowhere to go. And so that was really our focus, was how do we create a more scalable programmatic capital structure that also allows us to address the middle income. Next slide. Can we flip to the next slide here, please? Thank you. So we spent a couple of years, we put a working group together consisting of housers and bankers and consultants and attorneys trying to crack that code for the middle income. And the culmination of those efforts was the launching of a new joint powers authority, a political subdivision of the state of California, called CalCHA, the California Community Housing Agency. Next slide. So as we say here, CalCHA is a JPA. It's a political subdivision of the state. It's the first ever state agency focused exclusively on the preservation, protection, production of middle income housing specifically. There's plenty of other JPAs that generally operate in the housing space, usually as conduit issuers for more traditional bond transactions. But CalCHA is all about middle income housing production. Next slide. So the way the model works is our company Catalyst now partners with CalCHA on a number of fronts. As it says here, we work on the governmental affairs side of things to secure membership within CalCHA. So we're talking every day to cities, counties, housing authorities across the state, trying to drive membership in CalCHA, which is what it takes to be able to do something locally in any jurisdiction. We go out and identify acquisition and development opportunities. We oversee due diligence, financing, legal. We put up earnest money deposits and all of those things. And ultimately, it's CalCHA itself who directly takes title to these assets, and our company Catalyst serves as their asset manager on a post-close basis. Next slide. So what's powerful about the model, we heard a little bit earlier, I think it was Kate who was talking about the welfare exemption, California property tax welfare exemption, which is a pretty powerful exemption up to 80% of median income. What's unique about this model is that CalCHA as a governmental entity is by right able to obtain a 100% property tax exemption. So this is really has nothing to do with the set-asides. It has more to do with the fact that it's governmental, everything to do with the fact that it's governmental. And so, but if you could go back, the two things here between the property tax exemption and then also a model that is 100% debt financed in the municipal bond market, CalCHA as a governmental entity can issue its own governmental bonds and sell them to the largest municipal bond investors out there. We can really take all of the savings from the tax exemption as well as the savings from having a 100% financed low cost of capital and not having an equity partner who needs a 15, 20% return, and reinvest all of that into reducing rents such that they're affordable for middle income households. So housing affordability, we're really picking up where the tax credit model leaves off. And so generally, you think about tax credits in that sort of 30, 50, 60% AMI space. And I would say generally market rate rents, depending on the property and where it is, what it is, generally 120% AMI or beyond, sometimes in the Bay Area, 150% AMI and beyond. So we're really filling that gap of 60 to 120% median income. So our regulatory agreement generally splits the property into thirds. So we generally have a third below 80% AMI, a third in that 80 to 100, and a third in the 100 to 120. We also make sure we don't displace any existing residents. If people are already there, they can stay as long as they like. When they move on their own accord, we backfill with people who qualify for our program. And then we cap increases at 4%, which is not only inside of AB 1482, but if you look at the more traditional tax credit space and you look at the historic increases that HUD provides in high cost markets like the Bay Area, it's not uncommon to see double-digit growth in some of these tax credit properties from year to year. And so we thought it was important to cap growth at something well inside of that. From a public benefit side of things, there's two things here that I want to make sure I leave everybody with. The first is probably pretty obvious. If we buy a nice, large, new, high-end property in a high-rent market, and we reduce rent such that they're affordable for middle-income households, that's a pretty immediate public benefit that's created, as well as the ongoing cap on that annual growth. But probably more impactfully on a long-term basis, all of the financial upside of this program is granted to the underlying jurisdictions. And back to this concept of not having an equity investor, we have 30, 35, sometimes 40 years to pay off the bonds that back these projects. And once the bonds have been paid, all of the cash flow, all of the embedded equity, all of the financial upside, the control of the asset, the control over the affordability, everything is granted to the underlying jurisdiction. And so it's our hope that when we look back at this program in 20, 30 years, we will have created, tens of billions of dollars in public benefit and all of the embedded economics in these assets, and that these municipalities are leveraging that to reinvest into affordable housing in a very meaningful way. So far, CalCHA has 26 members. As I mentioned, these are cities, counties, housing authorities across the state. We've been unanimously approved in every jurisdiction that where we've gone to council thus far, which we feel pretty excited about. Next slide. I mentioned local approvals. This is what has to happen in order for us to operate in any municipality. So not only does the municipality have to join CalCHA, there's no cost, there's no liability to becoming a member of the JPA, but they have to authorize us to issue bonds locally. So you can't just show up somewhere and issue bonds in someone's backyard and say, trust me, it's for your own best interest. They have to approve this at a council meeting. And then this last one's pretty easy, but they have to be willing to accept all of the surplus economics to make sure that we are truly granting all of that public benefit creation to the public. So thus far, our company Catalyst, in partnership with CalCHA, will have soon directly acquired over $1.3 billion of assets over the past 2 years. So this is 9 properties, about 2,800 units. And there's others that have come into the market and leveraged this structure that we have created here. And collectively, there's another 8 assets, 2,100 units across the state that have been able to leverage what we created here to do very similar things. Just to touch on this, so we have a nonprofit arm called the Essential Housing Fund. We formed this last year. One thing that's interesting, back to this concept of the welfare exemption and property tax exemptions at 80% AMI, most nonprofits in the housing space are sort of backed into operating solely within the, quote unquote, low income space and below, which is defined by a cap at 80% AMI. The way that we have structured the Essential Housing Fund is we actually have a very unique designation and certification from the IRS in the state of California that we're able to operate in the middle income space. So we can do some powerful things here. One of our goals with the Essential Housing Fund is to cultivate additional nonprofit investment models, not only in California, but beyond. We're also using the Essential Housing Fund to subsidize rents for public school teachers at our properties. And lastly, we have some interesting diversity, equity, inclusion efforts going on where we're looking at not only more of that needing to occur within our industry, but beyond. And then we have another entity called the Catalyst Innovation Lab. Just to touch on this quickly, we spend a lot of time investing in, advising prop tech, so technology firms that touch the real estate space, more specifically the multifamily space. We incubate, pilot, scale various tools, solutions, partnerships. The whole goal here, as it says, is to drive operating margins, building efficiencies, portfolio sustainability. We want to do this in a way where we can unlock savings at the asset level and reinvest that back into incremental affordability for our households. That's the ultimate goal here. And just a few of the things that we're working on. RENA reform, which is number 3 here. We actually have a bill, AB 787, which hopefully will be passed this legislative season, that will allow cities to get credit for the middle income housing units that we're creating. We're just now sort of getting into new construction. We wanted to prove this model at scale by buying existing cash flowing assets where you could at least not add the construction risk to all of the other sort of innovative, new stuff that we threw out there that people weren't comfortable with. We have a big push into the teacher housing space. And then we're looking at property management, creating a brand around this, sustainability playbook, and sort of roll out at each of our assets, as well as additional resident services where they're needed. And I think that's it.
I'd like to invite our panelists to join us again. Get Kate back on. While there's Kate. Thanks, everybody. Really great presentations and a lot of information there. One of the things that I think is really fascinating is how your organizations are addressing this crisis at multiple levels and multiple layers and in multiple ways, and in the ways in which this all kind of works together in essence. There's a few questions that have come in, and we've got some that we've been compiling here. And I want to encourage folks that are watching to send us questions either through chat or through the Q&A function. But let me start quickly with you, Joe. The Mountain View project's really exciting. And when I visited there, one of the things that what really impressed me was the very kind of light footprint that it made in the community, meaning that it wasn't something that the surrounding businesses or neighbors might have a problem with. And so it kind of reduces the NIMBY sort of reaction to these types of projects. Could you talk a little bit about how you all went about engaging the community through this process? And then at the end of that, if you wouldn't mind sharing one of your biggest needs that you still have for this type of project.
Of course. Community is paramount. Whenever you're entering into other people's, like towns, cities, communities, it's crucial that they're engaged in the process. Change creates fear. So it's like we need to explain to people how we go about coming in and what we're planning on doing. And one of the questions in the chat is about, maintaining our communities. So we made a big outreach effort at the beginning of the process, knocking on doors, sending mail cards to engage with the community and explain what it is we were doing and how it would help the community. These, we talk about safety, we talk about communities. Our Mountain View project will be staffed 24/7. We definitely want to be a good neighbor. And to do so, that means working in partnership with not only our neighbors, with our police departments, our healthcare providers, our other resources, connections to library, children's resources, all of them. It's like when we talk about, raising families, it takes a village. Well, everyone in our community needs assistance, and we all need to rely on each other for certain resources. So we do make a key point of engaging and continuing opening up those lines of communications and maintaining those lines of communications, keeping the door open as we become operational. And there's lots and lots of partnerships and opportunities for volunteers to engage with us and to engage with our clients.
Wonderful, great. Thank you. And I'll
I'd
ask
like
you,
to also address
good.
the question of the historical problem with low-income housing. I think that's really true. There's a historical problem with low-income housing in terms of how it was put together and how it was perceived in the community. There were lots of projects that were done in the 50s, right, that are giant buildings that are placed in locations where there are no services, nothing, and no investment back into those buildings. Those days are long gone. We don't do housing like that anymore. Now those houses, you wouldn't be able to tell the affordable housing compared to other housing in your average neighborhood. We're held to a much higher standard than any normal developer or owner. We're inspected multiple times a year. We have to be engaged with our clients. We have to show that we're engaged with our clients. We have to provide services. We have to provide amenities that other developers are not held to that same standard. So what we used to think of as affordable housing isn't the same any longer. And especially in our area, when you're talking about affordable housing, you're not talking about people who are just on government assistance, right? Who really might not be out there in your community. You're talking about teachers, you're talking about aides, you're talking about, healthcare aides, you're talking about baristas, you're talking about people who are working in our community who can't afford to live here because they don't make enough money. They're at the bottom end of the income earning capacity. Most affordable housing is actually occupied by people who work very hard for a living and work on our behalf. And they want to live in decent, nice housing too. So we find that those old models and the way we perceived housing isn't the case anymore. The new buildings that are being built and managed and owned are really beautiful, and we work hard to maintain them.
Thank you. And a good question that's coming in, and Kate and Joanne might be able to address this. We have a couple of questions that I have for Jordan as well. Quick question, Joanne, do you have any data on the average length of time a family or individual might stay in transitional housing?
Absolutely. Data is at one of the cores of our organization. It's important to us and to our supporters and to the communities of how we move the needle. How are people who move through our programs, which are typically 90 to 120 days, where do they move on to? Our goal is interim housing. We want to, when people come into our facilities, you almost get like a crash course on life skills, on how stabilizing. When you've lived on the streets for any length of time, your head is not thinking about, oh, how am I going to get housing tomorrow? You're thinking about, am I going to be dry tonight? When I wake up in the morning, are all my possessions still going to be there? And where am I going to get a meal? So when you create communities to provide that shelter, the roof over the head, that's one step. And then we can go to work in addressing what caused the homelessness and what's it going to take to move you on to housing, stable housing. So we collect a lot of data. We work in partnerships with universities in Stanford and Palo Alto University to figure out what crucial element works to improve our success rates. And they're high, like as high as 86% for families and 67% for individuals. It's crucial we collect that data to know what works and what is working.
Right, that's great. And we have another question that's probably more geared towards Joanne and Kate, but before I get to that question, I want to ask Jordan just a couple of questions here that have been percolating. Jordan, in terms of, there's a lot of companies that are joining us today, and some folk connected to real estate, and obviously not nonprofits that have joined us today, but in terms of the impact on your company itself, starting the Essential Services Fund, the Essential Housing Fund, how did that have an impact on your company? Like in terms of your culture, the work that you do, when you went in that direction, what was the impact on your company?
It's definitely had a positive impact. I mean, I would say, we've been mission driven, even though we've been operating in the for-profit space, and we've taken the steps to become a certified B Corporation and changed all of our formative documents to make all of those commitments that you have to become a B Corp. And so, I would say the reason for it, if that's part of the question, we bought this asset in Marin County, which has some of the highest AMIs in the country. And we were looking at our cheapest rents at that property, post-acquisition. We put this regulatory agreement in place. It's a 342 unit property, and over a third of it is now restricted to sub 80% AMI households, so low income households. But if you do the math, if you are a starting teacher in Marin County, you don't make any more than a starting teacher really anywhere else in California or outside of California. So you make $50,000, right? And so you do the math, and we're asking our starting teachers in places like Marin County or the Peninsula, pick your place across the Bay Area, they would be paying 2/3 of their rent in order to achieve or to pay for our cheapest rents at this property, right? We felt great about ourselves that we bought this high-end market rate property and restricted it to low income and median and moderate income households, but it wasn't moving the needle for those teachers, right? If you've been teaching a while and you have a 2-income household, and that changes. But for our early teachers, who realistically our school districts are dependent upon and have a really tough time attracting and retaining, because people just throw their hands up and they say, hey, I'll move to Boise and make the same amount and have a really nice life, and it's not the worst place in the world to live, right? That was sort of the rationale for it. And so we thought we need to find a way to subsidize rents even further, even in our assets that we're already converting to middle income housing. And so we made the early contributions to the Essential Housing Fund. We're just now starting to raise sort of outside charitable donations for that. But the program that we've set up is that teachers who qualify, public school teachers in Marin County in this example, only pay 35% of what they actually make. And then we make up the difference. So it's like think of it as a privatized Section 8 program, basically, where we're just funding the difference right now. And that way, they can still get into an 80% AMI unit, and they have the protections on a go forward basis, but they just can't foot the bill right now. And so, we're stepping in to do that.
Do you have a just quick follow-up question on that? Let's see. Do you have kind of an idea of how you might be able to scale that or move that forward? Is there any sort of broad goals for that?
Yeah, there's a couple ways. I mean, we've committed as a company, that we give at a minimum 5% of top line revenues every single year to various charitable causes. And the Essential Housing Fund is one that we are contributing to. There's others as well, including HIF. Little plug there for you, Steve. But as I said, we're just now starting to think about doing some outside fundraising for the Essential Housing Fund. Additionally, we have been working on some tweaks to our more core essential housing model in ways where we may be able to contribute a percentage of revenues from our assets on an annual basis to the fund as well, which then becomes a bit more self-sustaining, because I think the problem that a lot of people have in the nonprofit space is that, January 1st, you're starting over again, right? And you're trying to go out and raise all that money to do what you can for that year.
Yes, absolutely. And Kate, pick a little bit on that, the topic of acquiring housing and the housing focus. Once you do acquire the housing, what are some of the challenges that you have, HIP Housing has? So you've got the housing, and then what?
The biggest challenge, so we don't have neighborhood NIMBYism, right? Because the buildings already exist. And once we acquire them, we often actually improve them. We build into our financing what we call a repair fund, so that we can make immediate improvements to the building that we might not, be able to do later. So we want to finance those in. So probably the biggest challenge is making sure that everybody really understands who already lives there. Our goal is that nobody gets displaced. So even if you're over income, we're not going to ask you to leave, but we do have to abide by all of the sort of annual certifications that every other nonprofit does. That means we have to income qualify you every year. So you have to provide personal information so that we know who income qualifies and who doesn't. And as soon as someone moves out by natural attrition, we would lease that unit up to someone who definitely does income qualify in the event that someone doesn't. But we don't ask anybody to leave. But making sure that tenants understand that they don't panic, that they don't start, going out to the city and saying, you can't do this, right? Because they're afraid that they might get pushed out of their housing. That's probably the biggest challenge. That, and just making sure that we've done our due diligence up front to buy buildings that we know we can maintain, and that they'll remain beautiful assets in the community. So sometimes you'll get a little surprise, like, oh, wait, we didn't know that it needed, some sort of major service that we missed when we did our physical needs assessment. But that's pretty rare. Typically it's really just more about making sure that the tenants understand what's going on, and that they, aren't feeling threatened.
That's great. Thank you. And there's a question that we've got a question that's someone from the nonprofit sector who has, oh, hi, Jeannie, has been working with clients that are elderly, disabled, and SSI. And many of the programs are transitional for that lower level or system middle income folks that we're discussing today. There might be many vacancies, but the problem is many folks don't qualify even if they have the income. Are there opportunities to propose other concepts for that demographic? Folks that maybe need more assistance, or do your programs currently address that?
So we have our home sharing program, which is primarily seniors and those at the lowest earning potential or earning income levels. So often the home providers who are interested in renting a room are going to be seniors themselves who tend to be, you know, house rich and cash poor with lots of extra space. So we have to work with them very closely and try to find good matches of folks. And a senior to senior is actually often a very good match, because not only does it help to provide a little extra income in terms of rent, but it can provide companionship and those other things as well. One of the challenges that we have in home sharing, though, is that people know the value of their room. Right? You've got Airbnb, you've got all of these short-term rental businesses now that are competing for those same rooms, and people know they can make a lot of money on those rooms. So it's a matter of educating the public about what it means to keep your rents low enough that you get a wider pool to pick from in terms of who you rent to on a permanent basis. And also that you understand that by raising those rents, you're eliminating a large portion of the population who needs housing. So, you know, we've been doing home sharing quite a long time. So that's one option for that population. The disabled community, very, very low income, SSI, disabled community, that's always going to be a challenge. Those wait lists are often closed at the county level, like through the housing authorities. But there are buildings that have set-asides for that population. And getting that information out, having a one-stop shop for information about where to go to find housing that meets your criteria is really important. And there really isn't that in the county, not in San Mateo County anyway. We're working on an information and referral program right now, actually, that would help consolidate some of that information so that you have a place to go where it's all sort of compiled. Right now, every agency kind of does it on their own, and everybody has a little bit of different information. But you know, we've got several new senior buildings that are opening in San Mateo County, and those wait lists, when they open, you got to get on there right away, right? They fill up quickly. So having that information in advance is important.
And just maybe asking, and the follow-up question that was, there are obviously still challenges, even with all these opportunities or resources that might be out there. Is there an opportunity for new concepts in that space? Just a general question that maybe puts all three of you in terms of the acquisition of housing or the transitional programs that you're running currently.
I'm happy to step in here because we need more supply. On the whole spectrum of housing, we need lots more supply, especially at the lower end of the spectrum of housing. So when we look at Mountain View, there was a question that came up about case management. A clear ratio is about 1 to 15. But what we find is that not everybody is going to move into a permanent housing unit. There's three different strands. When I talk about the success rates, a third of our clients are reunited with family. A third possibly move out of city, out of county, out of state, and they acknowledge what their affordability levels are. And then a third are connected to the right resources. So it's not solving for 11,000 people who are homeless today. We're not finding 11,000 units in the next couple of years. There's other avenues. And so it's connecting people who are disabled or elderly SSI to other resources, not necessarily a brick and mortar unit. And that's crucial. And that's why it's crucial to get people off of the streets so we can assess and direct them and connect them to the correct resources. And one of the challenges that we find is that right now we need land. We need to increase the supply. In order to do that, we need to replace buildings that are no longer functionally viable, functionally obsolete. So let's replace those with more of the Mountain View concepts, more of the affordable housing, and we need land. So if I'm going to do a picture what we need, we got Home Key 2.0 funding coming out in the next couple of months, and we're looking for partners. We're looking for public and private partners to create more of these opportunities to stabilize people, give them a dignified place to live, and help our communities succeed at all levels.
Hey, Steve, can I ask a quick follow-up question on that?
Sure.
Joanne, I'm wondering with the ADU legislation in California, for owners of existing multifamily assets, of which you've got plenty of those on the phone today, I think. When you look at what you're able to do at an existing asset just by right now, does that help you at all? And have you gone down that path, or do you need to build larger, denser facilities in order to have the nurse that you mentioned and other things on site?
What we do, like we need to help clients stabilize. Even a couple of days on the street can be traumatizing. So we need the facilities to bring people together, to make them feel loved and supported, and to understand what their needs are. Like the ADUs are great, but we need people to come together in one place. It helps us to deliver efficient and effective services. And when we're housing people, even in like permanent supportive housing, it's like you need density. And we're landlocked, and we need to maximize the use of our land, especially next to the resources and next to transit and next to jobs. So ADUs, on the whole spectrum of housing, they fill a function, but the scale that we need to see communities of at least 100 doors and such like to make the best use of our land.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. And the Jenny, I will make sure that the information from the panelists is shared with anyone. If you'd like to follow up with one or all of our panelists regarding some of the ideas you have around access to affordable housing for folks with more barriers. So I will share this. I will share contact information with all of our guests today from our panelists, and links to their websites and their email addresses. And we're getting close to the end of our time. We're only mindful of everyone's time, but I guess I just would ask each panelist to share with us, to kind of take us out on a high note maybe, what you're hopeful for as this year winds down and into next year relative to the projects and programs that we discussed today. And we'll start with you, Joanne.
Okay, I am just blown away by the level of political support in getting us out of this crisis. The momentum had been steadily building. We saw it it was off the charts in 2020. And that motivation, that determination, and with the support of all our community benefit partners, we're going to make an impact here on homelessness. We know that we can no longer sit back and do nothing, and we're doing it, and we can do it, and we have the answers.
Great, thank you. Kate.
Oh, well, of course, for me, it's the cross-sector collaborations, the private, public, nonprofit sector intersection where when you've got all three sectors really strong and working together, that's how we're going to solve the problem, right? It's too big for any one sector to solve on their own. And the kind of investment that we've seen from private industry and individuals, the awareness and the interest in creating housing opportunity, that's where I'm most excited about. I'm also super excited about the idea of creating housing opportunity for folks at a variety of income levels. So the work that Jordan's doing too is super exciting.
Great, thank you. And Jordan, please.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kate. We talk about this housing ladder all the time, from homelessness to home ownership. And I would say we're pretty proud of what we've created, but we know that we can do even more, and we can provide even more affordability. And at times, we look at those calculations at the 120% level or whatever, and they're not, we'd like to push that even further. And so I would say I'm most excited about version 2.0 of this essential housing model, which I hope to be able to announce in the not too distant future, which will allow us to scale even faster. It'll further reduce our cost of capital. It'll perpetually fund our essential housing fund, allow us to provide, much more deeply affordable rents. And so we've been working away at that, and hope that we'll have something to talk about here in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And thank all of you for that, ending on a high note. And I would say from HIF's perspective, I echo a lot of what you're saying, that these collaborations, and especially in the face of this pandemic, I managed to get through a webinar and didn't bring up the pandemic once, which is remarkable. But and I'm doing it now, but in the face of this pandemic, we've really seen people want to step up. And we know there's challenges. We know this isn't all rose colored, but there has been a lot of people stepping up within our network, our collaborations that we've historically had between our three organizations and others. And then with our own programs, our own affordable housing initiative, where we're getting units donated for teachers and other essential workers. We're very enthusiastic about the coming year and next year. We know there's landmines out there, but we're enthusiastic, and bringing you folks together today to talk about the innovative work you're doing gives me an extra charge of motivation. And I know a lot of our guests feel the same way. So thank you very much. And we'll be sending out your information to all the guests. And I'll be following up with you all, as you know, as I often do in the coming weeks. So thank you so much, and have a great day and have a great weekend. And thanks everyone for joining us.